The champagne glasses clinked together in the Grand Hall of the Reich Chancellery in Berlin. It was May 1940, and the German officers could barely contain their excitement. France had fallen in just 6 weeks. The mighty French army, which had fought for 4 years in the Great War, had collapsed like a house of cards. Now, these same officers stood around a massive oak table, looking at maps of Europe painted in red. Almost the entire continent belonged to Germany. Major Klaus Richter stood near the window, watching the celebration but not joining it. He was 32 years old, tall and thin, with sharp blue eyes that had seen too much war already. Unlike the other officers who were laughing and drinking, Klaus felt something strange in his chest, something that felt like doubt. "Gentlemen, your attention, please." General Wilhelm Keitel's voice cut through the noise. The room fell silent. Keitel was Hitler's chief military advisor, and when he spoke, everyone listened. He unrolled a large map on the table. It showed the British Isles across the English Channel. "Operation Sea Lion," Keitel announced with a smile. "Our plan to invade Britain." The officers crowded around the table. Klaus moved closer too, studying the details. The plan showed German forces crossing the Channel, landing on the southern coast of England, and marching straight to London. Simple, clean, efficient. "The Führer has given us a timeline," Keitel continued. 6 weeks, maybe less. Britain is finished. Their army left everything on the beaches of Dunkirk. Tanks, guns, vehicles all abandoned. They have nothing left to fight with. An older colonel named Brenner laughed. 6 weeks? I say 3. The British will surrender the moment our boots touch their soil. They are a nation of shopkeepers, not warriors. The room erupted in agreement and laughter. Klaus remained quiet. He had read the intelligence reports. Yes, the British had evacuated from Dunkirk, leaving behind their equipment. Yes, their forces were scattered and disorganized. But something in those reports bothered him. The British had rescued over 300,000 soldiers from those beaches. That took organization. That took courage. "Major Richter," Keitel's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "You seem concerned. Do you doubt our victory?" All eyes turned to Klaus. He straightened his uniform and chose his words carefully. "No, Herr General. I simply wonder about the British Navy. They still control the seas. And their air force, though smaller than ours, still exists." Keitel waved his hand dismissively. "The Luftwaffe will crush the Royal Air Force in days. Hermann Göring has promised this personally. As for their navy, they will not risk their precious ships against our air power. Besides, their Prime Minister Chamberlain is weak. He will negotiate peace." But Klaus knew something the others did not seem to know. Chamberlain was no longer Prime Minister. A man named Winston Churchill had taken his place just days ago. Klaus had read Churchill's file. This man had fought in wars before. This man had written books about never surrendering. This man was different. "The reconnaissance photos, please," Keitel ordered. An aide brought forward large photographs taken by German aircraft flying over Britain. They showed coastal defenses, military bases, and cities. Everything looked vulnerable. The British seemed unprepared for invasion. Hitler himself entered the room at that moment. Everyone stood at attention, arms raised in salute. The Führer walked to the table and examined the maps with satisfaction. He was in an excellent mood. Why wouldn't he be? He had conquered Poland, Norway, Denmark, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. Only Britain remained. 6 weeks, Hitler said softly, tapping the map of London with his finger. "In 6 weeks, we will parade through London. The British Empire will surrender. They have no choice. They stand alone now. No allies, no hope, just a small island waiting to be taken." The officers nodded eagerly. Plans were discussed. The Luftwaffe would begin bombing raids immediately to destroy British airfields and factories. The Navy would prepare invasion barges. The Army would train for beach landings. Everything was falling into place. Klaus was assigned to lead bomber formations over southern England. He would help prepare the way for the invasion. As the meeting ended and officers filed out, still celebrating, Klaus remained behind, staring at the map. Britain looked so small, so vulnerable, so easy to defeat. Yet something nagged at him. He thought about the soldiers at Dunkirk. The British had been surrounded, defeated, with their backs to the sea. They should have surrendered. Instead, they had fought their way to the beaches and escaped. Small boats, fishing vessels, private yachts, even pleasure craft had crossed the channel under heavy fire to rescue them. Ordinary British citizens had risked their lives to save their soldiers. That did not seem like a nation ready to quit. Klaus rolled up his portion of the maps and left the chancellery. Outside, Berlin was celebrating. Flags hung from every building. People danced in the streets. Germany had never been stronger, never been more powerful, never been closer to total victory. But as Klaus walked to his car, he looked up at the sky. Soon he would be flying over England, dropping bombs, preparing for invasion. The Luftwaffe had over 2,000 aircraft ready. The British had maybe 600 fighters. The numbers were clear. Germany would win. Still, that feeling in his chest would not go away. He thought about something his grandfather had told him years ago, a veteran of the Franco-Prussian War. Klaus, my boy, never underestimate an enemy who refuses to see he is beaten. Klaus got into his car and drove through the celebrating crowds. In 2 weeks, he would fly his first mission over Britain. In 6 weeks, according to the plan, the war would be over. Germany would rule all of Europe. The 1,000-year Reich would be complete, did he try to believe it. He tried to feel the same confidence as the other officers. But that small doubt remained like a pebble in his boot. Small, but impossible to ignore. The war was about to enter its most crucial phase. Germany expected a quick victory. The plan was perfect. The forces were ready. Britain stood alone and defenseless. What could possibly go wrong? The telegram arrived at Tom Harrison's door on a gray Tuesday morning in late May 1940. His wife Mary took it from the delivery boy with shaking hands. She knew what these telegrams meant. Everyone in London knew. She opened it slowly, and the words blurred through her tears. We regret to inform you that Private Robert Harrison is missing, presumed killed in action at Dunkirk. Tom came home from his shift at the munitions factory to find Mary sitting at the kitchen table, the telegram clutched in her hands. Robert was his younger brother, just 21 years old. He had joined the army last year, eager to serve his country. Now he was gone, somewhere on the beaches of France. Tom did not cry. Not yet. He simply held Mary and stared at the wall. Outside their window, London looked different now. Sandbags lined the streets. Barrage balloons floated in the sky like giant gray fish. People walked faster, heads down, fear in their eyes. The newspapers screamed terrible news every day. France had fallen. The British army had barely escaped Dunkirk. Hitler controlled all of Europe. The St. Thomas Hospital. Elizabeth Webb finished her 16th hour of her shift. She was a nurse, 30 years old, and she had not slept properly in days. The hospital was overwhelmed with wounded soldiers returning from France. They arrived on trains and trucks, bloody and broken, telling stories that made her blood run cold. One young soldier, no more than 19, grabbed her arm as she changed his bandages. "Nurse, you have to understand. The Germans, they're unstoppable. Tanks everywhere. Planes filling the sky. We had nothing. We couldn't fight them. They're coming here next. They'll be here soon." Elizabeth tried to smile, tried to be brave. "You're safe now. You're home." But the soldier shook his head. "Home? For how long? They'll invade. Everyone knows it. Maybe we should just surrender now. Save the bloodshed." She heard that word more and more. Surrender. It floated through the hospital corridors like poison gas. Some doctors whispered it. Some patients believed it. Even some politicians were saying it in Parliament. At RAF Biggin Hill, Flight Lieutenant James Crawford stood with his squadron mates near their Hurricane fighters. They were young men, most under 25, and they were terrified, though they tried not to show it. Intelligence reports said the German Luftwaffe had over 2,000 aircraft. The RAF had maybe 600 fighters to defend all of Britain. "We're outgunned, outmanned, and alone," said Peter, James's wingman and best friend. "The French Air Force is gone. The Dutch, the Belgians, all gone. It's just us now." James looked at his aircraft. The Hawker Hurricane was a good plane, but the Germans had Messerschmitts that were faster and better armed. They also had experience. German pilots had been fighting in Spain, in Poland, in France. They were veterans. Most RAF pilots had never fired their guns in combat. "Did you hear?" Another pilot said quietly. "Parliament is debating right now. Some want to negotiate with Hitler. Some say we should make peace while we still can." In the Houses of Parliament, that debate was indeed raging. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain had resigned days ago, broken by the failure of his peace policies. Winston Churchill, who had warned about Hitler for years, was now Prime Minister. But many members of Parliament did not trust him. They thought he was too aggressive, too warlike, too stubborn. Lord Halifax, the Foreign Secretary, stood in a closed meeting arguing for negotiation. "We must be realistic. Germany controls the continent. Our army is shattered. Our allies are defeated. Perhaps we can negotiate terms, keep our independence in exchange for staying out of the war." Other voices agreed. Britain was an island. Maybe they could make a deal. Maybe they could avoid invasion. Maybe they could survive by bending to Hitler's will. Tom read about these debates in the newspaper during his lunch break at the factory. The workers around him were quiet, worried. "What do you think, Tom?" asked his foreman. "Should we fight or make peace?" Tom thought about his brother Robert, lying dead on some French beach. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I just don't know anymore." That evening, families across Britain gathered around their radios. The BBC News was grim. German forces were massing across the channel. Reconnaissance aircraft reported hundreds of barges being assembled for invasion. Hitler was giving speeches about the final destruction of the British Empire. Invasion seemed inevitable. Defeat seemed certain. Elizabeth walked home through blacked-out streets. No lights were allowed at night anymore, in case German bombers came. She passed buildings already damaged by early air raids. She saw people queuing for gas masks. Children were being evacuated from London to the countryside. Everything felt like the end was coming to the airfield. James lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling. He had written a letter to his mother earlier, just in case. Just in case he did not come back from his next flight. The letter was hidden in his footlocker. He wondered if he would ever have the courage his father had shown in the Great War, in Parliament. Churchill sat in his new office, smoking a cigar, reading reports. The military situation was desperate. The political situation was unstable. Half his own government wanted to negotiate surrender. The British people were frightened and demoralized. Invasion was expected within weeks. But Churchill was not a man who surrendered. He had fought in wars on 3 continents. He had been a soldier, a war correspondent, a minister during the Great War. He had seen Britain face dark times before. He knew something that the frightened politicians did not know. He knew that words had power. Leadership had power. Had power that he began writing a speech. Not a long speech. Not a complicated speech. A speech that would tell the British people the truth. Yes, the situation was dark. Yes, they stood alone. Yes, invasion was coming. But no, they would not surrender. Never. Not ever. Tom went to bed that night, holding Mary close. She cried for Robert. He stared into the darkness, wondering if they had weeks or days before German soldiers marched through London. Wondering if his factory would still be standing next month. Wondering if any of this fighting was worth it. Elizabeth finally reached her flat after midnight. She was so tired she could barely stand. Tomorrow there would be more wounded soldiers. More death. More suffering. She wondered how long Britain could last. James closed his eyes at the airfield, trying to sleep, knowing that dawn would bring another day of waiting. Waiting for the invasion. Waiting for bombers. Waiting for the end. All across Britain, people went to sleep with the same fear. The same question. Should they fight or surrender? Could they even win? Was there any hope left? The next day, June 4th, 1940, Winston Churchill would give them an answer. An answer that would change everything. An answer that would echo through history. But tonight, Britain held its breath in the darkness, waiting for a dawn that might never come. June 4th, 1940. The House of Commons was packed with members of Parliament. Every seat was filled. Men stood along the walls. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. Outside, rain fell on London streets. Inside, everyone waited for Winston Churchill to speak. Churchill was 65 years old, heavy-set, with a round face and piercing eyes. He stood at the dispatch box, papers in his hand, looking around the chamber. Some of these men wanted him to negotiate surrender. Some thought he was leading Britain to destruction. He could see the doubt in their faces, the fear, the exhaustion. At the munitions factory, Tom Harrison and his fellow workers gathered around a radio in the canteen. The foreman had given them permission to listen during their break. The BBC announcer's voice crackled through the speaker. The Prime Minister will now address Parliament. This speech will be broadcast to the nation. Tom wiped his greasy hands on his overalls and leaned closer. Around him, men who had been joking minutes ago were now silent. Waiting at St. Thomas Hospital, Elizabeth Webb was changing bandages on a soldier's leg when a matron announced that Churchill was about to speak. Someone brought a radio into the ward. Nurses, doctors, and patients who could move gathered around. Those who could not move listened from their beds. The wounded soldier Elizabeth was treating, the one who had talked about surrender, closed his eyes to listen better. TRAF Biggin Hill. James Crawford and his squadron sat on the grass near their hurricanes. A radio had been set up on a wooden crate. The pilots sprawled in the weak sunshine, trying to look relaxed. But James could see the tension in their faces. They needed something. Hope. Direction. A reason to keep fighting in Parliament. Churchill began to speak. His voice was unusual, a bit slurred from a childhood speech impediment he had worked hard to overcome. But it was strong, clear, determined. He started by describing what had happened at Dunkirk. He did not lie. He did not pretend it was a victory. We must be very careful not to assign to this deliverance the attributes of a victory. Wars are not won by evacuations. Tom felt his heart sink. Was Churchill about to announce surrender? But then Churchill's voice grew stronger. He talked about the rescue, about the British and Allied soldiers who had been saved. Over 335,000 men. He described it simply, factually, but with pride. The little ships, the Royal Navy, the sacrifice. Nevertheless, Churchill continued, and Tom leaned even closer to the radio. Our thankfulness at the escape of our army must not blind us to the fact that what has happened in France and Belgium is a colossal military disaster. Elizabeth glanced at the faces around her. Some patients were crying quietly. The truth was hard to hear. Britain had lost. France had fallen. They were alone. Churchill talked about the losses. Equipment left behind. Tanks, guns, vehicles, all abandoned on the beaches. The French army defeated. The Dutch and Belgian forces gone. He laid it all out honestly. No sugarcoating. No false comfort. James felt Peter tense beside him. This was it then. Churchill was preparing them for surrender. Better to hear the truth than false promises. Then Churchill's voice changed. It grew harder, fiercer. His words came faster, with more passion. Even though large tracts of Europe and many old and famous states have fallen or may fall into the grip of the Gestapo and all the odious apparatus of Nazi rule, we shall not flag or fail. Tom's breath caught in his throat. We shall go on to the end. The factory workers looked at each other. What was he saying? We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. James sat up straighter. His squadron mates were listening intently. Now, Churchill's voice rose, each phrase building on the last, like hammer blows on an anvil. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. Elizabeth felt tears running down her face. She was not sure why yet. We shall fight on the beaches. Tom clenched his fists. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. The wounded soldier in the hospital bed opened his eyes. He was crying too. Then came the final words, the words that would echo through history. We shall never surrender. Silence in Parliament. Silence in the factory. Silence in the hospital. Silence at the airfield. Then someone in Parliament started clapping. Then another. Then more. The opposition benches. The government benches. Men who had been arguing for surrender hours ago were now on their feet, cheering in the factory. Tom stood up slowly. His foreman was wiping his eyes. The man next to Tom, whose son had died in France, saluted the radio. Then Tom started clapping. Then everyone was clapping, shouting, some crying at the hospital. Elizabeth looked around at the wounded soldiers. They were sitting up in their beds, those who could. Some were saluting. Others were just nodding, tears streaming down their faces. The soldier who had talked about surrender was gripping his sheets, his jaw set. "We shall never surrender," he whispered. "Never." At the airfield, James looked at Peter. His friend was smiling. Actually smiling. Around them, pilots were standing, some laughing, some crying, all energized. The fear was still there. The odds were still impossible. But something had changed. Something fundamental. Churchill continued speaking, his voice now calmer, talking about fighting on even if Britain was invaded and occupied. And even if, which I do not for a moment believe, this island or a large part of it were subjugated and starving, then our empire beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the British fleet, would carry on the struggle until, in God's good time, the new world, with all its power and might, steps forth to the rescue and the liberation of the old. Tom realized he was crying. Not from sadness now, from something else. Determination. Hope. Churchill had not promised victory. He had not said it would be easy. He had simply said they would never give up, never quit, never surrender. And somehow, that was everything. Elizabeth returned to her work with new energy. The wounded needed care. Britain needed nurses. She would not fail them. James walked back to his Hurricane and patted its fuselage. "All right, old girl," he said quietly. "Looks like we've got work to do." All across Britain, people who had been listening to the speech felt the same transformation. Churchill had not changed the facts. France was still defeated. Germany still controlled Europe. Invasion was still coming. The odds were still terrible. But Churchill had changed something more important than facts. He had changed hearts. He had given people something worth fighting for. Not just survival. Dignity. Honor. Defiance in the face of evil. That night, Tom went home and held Mary close. "Robert didn't die for nothing," he told her. "We're going to win this. I don't know how, but we're going to win." The speech lasted less than an hour. The words were simple, but they changed the war. Germany had expected Britain to surrender within weeks. Churchill had just told them it would never happen. The fight was about to begin. July 10th, 1940. Major Klaus Richter climbed into his Heinkel bomber at a German airfield in occupied France. The early morning sun was just rising over the channel. Behind him, hundreds of other German aircraft were preparing for the same mission. The Battle of Britain had officially begun. "Today we destroy their airfields," Klaus's commander had said at the briefing. "Tomorrow, their factories. Next week, their cities. In 2 weeks, Britain surrenders." Klaus checked his instruments and started the engines. The plan was simple. The Luftwaffe would gain air superiority by destroying the Royal Air Force on the ground and in the air. Then German forces would invade. Operation Sea Lion would proceed. The war would be over. He took off and joined the massive formation. Over 200 bombers protected by Messerschmitt fighters. The largest air armada ever assembled. They flew over the channel toward England. Klaus had flown combat missions over Poland and France. This should be no different, but it was different. RAF Biggin Hill, the alarm sounded at 7 in the morning. James Crawford was eating breakfast when he heard it. He dropped his fork and ran toward his Hurricane. Around him, pilots scrambled to their aircraft. Ground crews were already starting engines. "Large formation, heading northwest," the operations officer shouted. "Over 100 bandits. Angels 15. James strapped into his cockpit. His hands were shaking slightly, but his mind was clear. Churchill's words echoed in his memory. "We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air." Time to prove it. Point 12 Hurricanes took off within 3 minutes. They climbed steeply into the morning sky. James looked around at his squadron. Peter flew on his right wing. Good. They had trained together for months. They trusted each other. "Tally-ho!" The squadron leader's voice crackled over the radio. Enemy formation at 2 o'clock high. James saw them. A massive wall of German aircraft, bombers in the center, fighters circling like wolves. His mouth went dry. There were so many, but there was no time for fear. "Attack! Attack! Attack!" The squadron leader dove toward the bombers. Klaus was scanning the sky when he saw the British fighters diving toward his formation. Only 12 of them against over 200 German aircraft. The British pilots had to be crazy, or desperate, or both. Then the sky exploded into chaos. James fired his 8 machine guns at a Heinkel bomber. Tracers streaked through the air. The bomber's rear gunner fired back. James broke left, avoiding the bullets by inches. Peter attacked from the other side. The Heinkels started smoking. All around them, aircraft twisted and turned in deadly combat. German fighters tried to protect the bombers. British fighters tried to break through. Aircraft fell from the sky, trailing fire and smoke. Parachutes blossomed like white flowers against the blue sky. Klaus felt his bomber shudder as bullets struck the fuselage. Alarm screamed. His co-pilot was shouting something. A British Hurricane flashed past, so close Klaus could see the pilot's face. Young, determined, not afraid, the bomber formation broke apart. Some turned back toward France. Others pressed on toward their targets. Klaus wrestled with the controls, trying to maintain altitude. They had been hit harder than he thought. The battle lasted 30 minutes, but felt like 30 hours. When it was over, James landed his Hurricane with fuel nearly empty and ammunition completely gone. His aircraft had bullet holes in the wings. But he was alive. He had shot down one bomber and damaged another. Across southern England, similar battles raged every day. The Germans came in waves. Hundreds of aircraft. The RAF threw every available fighter into the sky. Pilots flew 4, 5, sometimes 6 missions a day. They were exhausted. But they did not quit in London. Tom Harrison worked 16-hour shifts at the munitions factory. They were producing ammunition 24 hours a day now. Every bullet, every shell, every bomb was needed. The workers barely slept, but they did not complain. Churchill's words had changed them. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. Tonight, the German bombers came to London. The Blitz had begun. Tom would hear the air raid sirens and rush with Mary to the underground shelter. The bombs fell like thunder. Buildings collapsed. Fires raged. But every morning, Tom went back to the factory. Every morning, the factory was still producing. Elizabeth worked in makeshift hospitals set up in underground stations during the air raids. She treated civilians and RAF pilots side by side. Burns, broken bones, shrapnel wounds. The casualties mounted every day, but nobody talked about surrender anymore. That word had died the day Churchill spoke. One night, a building near the hospital took a direct hit. Elizabeth and other nurses rushed out to help. They pulled people from the rubble with their bare hands. An elderly man, covered in dust, refused to be evacuated. My home's been here 60 years, he told Elizabeth. Hitler can't have it. That was the spirit everywhere. Defiance, stubbornness, British people refusing to break. Klaus flew mission after mission over England. Each time, he expected to find fewer British fighters. Each time, there were more. How were they doing it? German intelligence had said the RAF was almost destroyed. But every day, British fighters rose to meet them. He read the loss reports with growing concern. July, 200 German aircraft lost. August, 360. September, still losing aircraft at a rate Germany could not sustain. The British were losing planes too, but they were fighting on home ground. Their pilots who parachuted to safety could fight again the next day. German pilots who parachuted became prisoners. One morning, Klaus's squadron commander did not return from mission. His best friend, Werner, was shot down over Kent. Another friend, Hans, crashed in the Channel. The confident predictions of quick victory seemed like ancient history now. A Luftwaffe briefing in September. The officers were no longer smiling. We have lost over 1,500 aircraft, a general admitted. The British have lost similar numbers, but their factories are producing more fighters every week. And their pilots, these British pilots, they do not quit. Klaus thought about the young British pilot he had seen during that first battle. That determined face. He had seen that same determination in every British pilot since. They were outnumbered, but not outfought. On September 15th, the Luftwaffe launched its largest attack yet. Over 1,000 aircraft attacked London in 2 waves. It was meant to be the final, crushing blow. The RAF threw everything into the sky to stop them. James flew 3 missions that day. His squadron shot down 12 German aircraft and damaged many more. Across England, RAF squadrons did the same. By nightfall, the Germans had lost 56 aircraft. The RAF lost 26 fighters, but most pilots survived. That night, Hitler held a meeting in Berlin. Klaus heard about it later from other officers. Operation Sea Lion had been postponed indefinitely. Germany could not achieve air superiority. They could not protect an invasion fleet. Britain would not surrender. The 6-week timeline had come and gone. Britain was still fighting, still standing, still defiant. Klaus sat in his barracks that night, writing a letter to his wife. "We thought they would break," he wrote. "We thought fear would defeat them. We were wrong. I have never seen people fight like this. Not with better weapons, not with superior numbers, but with something we did not account for. Will. Pure, stubborn will. That British Prime Minister, Churchill, he gave them that. His words turned fear into courage. I do not know if we could defeat that." He sealed the letter, but did not send it. Such doubts would be considered treason. But he knew they were true. The Battle of Britain continued through October, but the German attacks grew smaller, less frequent. The invasion was not coming. Not this year. Maybe not ever. Britain had survived. October 12, 1940. Major Klaus Richter's aircraft was hit by anti-aircraft fire over Sussex. He barely had time to think before his Heinkel bomber was spinning toward the ground. He shouted to his crew to bail out. The co-pilot did not respond. He was already dead. Klaus pulled the emergency release and fell into cold English air. His parachute opened with a violent jerk. Below him, his bomber crashed into a field and exploded. He floated down, watching British soil rush up to meet him. He landed hard in a farmer's field. Pain shot through his ankle. Sprained or broken, he could not tell. He tried to stand but collapsed. This was it. He was now a prisoner of war. The enemy would be here soon. But the enemy who arrived was not what he expected. Tom Harrison had been walking home from his factory shift when he saw that a German bomber go down. He ran toward the crash site with several other men from the village. They found Klaus lying in the field, struggling to release his parachute harness. Tom approached carefully. The German was injured and unarmed. He looked young and scared, just like Robert had probably looked on the beaches of Dunkirk before he died. Tom felt hatred rise in his chest. This man had been bombing British cities, killing British civilians, destroying British homes. But then Tom remembered Churchill's words. "We shall never surrender, never become like the enemy, never lose our humanity." "Easy there," Tom said, kneeling beside Klaus. "You're hurt. Don't move." Klaus stared at him in confusion. "You speak German?" "A bit. Learned it in the last war." Tom examined Klaus's ankle. "It's broken, I think. We need to get you to a doctor." Other villagers arrived. Some wanted revenge. Some wanted to hurt the German pilot. But Tom stood up and faced them. He's a prisoner now, under the Geneva Convention. We don't treat prisoners like the Nazis do. We're better than that. An old man, a veteran of the Great War, nodded slowly. "The lad's right. We fight like lions, but we treat prisoners like human beings. That's what makes us different." They carried Klaus to the village on a makeshift stretcher. A local doctor set his ankle. The Home Guard arrived to take him into custody. Before they let him away, Klaus looked at Tom. "Why?" he asked. "I have been bombing your cities, killing your people. Why show mercy?" Tom thought about his brother Robert, about Churchill's speech, about what Britain was fighting for. "Because," he said quietly, "we're fighting to preserve civilization, not destroy it." Klaus was taken to a prisoner of war camp in Scotland. The camp was basic but clean. The food was adequate. Prisoners were treated according to international law. Guards were firm but not cruel. It was nothing like the concentration camps Klaus had heard rumors about in occupied Europe. In his cell, Klaus had time to think. Time to remember. He thought about the certainty with which Germany had started this war. The absolute confidence that Britain would surrender in weeks. How had it all gone so wrong? One day, a guard brought a radio into the common area. British prisoners of war in Germany were not given such luxuries. But here, German prisoners could listen to BBC broadcasts. Klaus gathered with other captured airmen to hear the news. Churchill's voice crackled through the speaker. He was giving another speech. Klaus listened carefully. Churchill talked about the Battle of Britain, about the RAF pilots who had saved the nation. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. The German prisoners sat in silence, listening to the British Prime Minister praise the men who had shot them down. There was no hatred in Churchill's voice, no cruelty, just acknowledgement of courage and sacrifice. Klaus understood then what he had missed before. Churchill had not defeated Germany with superior weapons or numbers. He had defeated them with words, with will, with the power of leadership. His speeches had transformed a frightened nation into a defiant one. His words had given ordinary people the courage to do extraordinary things. In London, James Crawford received a Distinguished Flying Cross Medal for his service during the Battle of Britain. He stood at attention as a senior officer pinned it to his uniform. But James did not feel victorious. Too many friends had died. Peter was gone, shot down in September. Nearly 500 RAF pilots had been killed, but they had won. Britain still stood. The invasion had been canceled. Hitler had turned his attention to the Soviet Union instead. Britain had survived the darkest hour. Elizabeth Webb continued nursing through the Blitz and beyond. The bombing continued in 1941, but the intensity decreased. Britain was learning to endure, to survive, to fight back. She kept a photograph in her pocket of a young pilot she had saved in September. He was back flying now, defending the skies. Tom Harrison rebuilt his bombed neighborhood with his own hands. The factory where he worked had been hit 3 times, but kept producing. Mary had taken a job as a bus driver, replacing the men who had gone to fight. Women all over Britain were doing jobs they had never done before. The entire nation had transformed. One evening, Tom raised a British flag over his rebuilt home. Neighbors came out to watch. Some cried. Some saluted. All remembered the dark days of June 1940, when surrender seemed inevitable. "We never gave up," Tom said to no one in particular. "Churchill told us never to surrender. And we didn't." In his prison camp in Scotland, Klaus Richter received letters from home. Germany was now fighting on multiple fronts. The Soviet Union, North Africa, and still bombing Britain. The quick, easy victory Hitler had promised was impossible now. The war that should have ended in 1940 was dragging on with no end in sight. Klaus read Churchill's speeches translated into German. He studied them like a military textbook. He understood now. Germany had better tanks, better tactics, better initial strategy. But Britain had something more powerful. Leadership, the right words at the right moment. Churchill had given his people something to believe in when all hope seemed lost. In 1945, when Germany finally surrendered, Klaus was still a prisoner in Scotland. He heard the news on the radio. The Thousand-Year Reich had lasted 12 years. Hitler was dead. Germany was destroyed. Europe was in ruins. A British guard came to Klaus's cell. "War's over, mate. You'll be going home soon." Klaus nodded slowly. "Home to what?" he asked. "Everything is gone." The guard shrugged. "Then you rebuild. That's what we did after the Blitz. You rebuild and start again." Klaus was repatriated to Germany in late 1945. He returned to a country broken and occupied. His home city was rubble. But he carried with him a small, smuggled copy of Churchill's June 4th speech, translated into German. He had read it so many times he knew it by heart. Years later, Klaus would tell his children about the war, about the moment when Germany expected Britain to surrender, about Churchill's speech, about the determination of ordinary British people who refused to quit. "We lost the war in June 1940, he would tell them. "We just did not know it yet. We thought military power was everything. But we were wrong. Words have power too. Leadership has power. And a nation that refuses to surrender cannot be defeated." In Britain, Churchill's speech became legend. The words were taught in schools, remembered in ceremonies, quoted in times of trouble. "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall never surrender." Tom Harrison lived to be 90 years old. He never forgot his brother Robert. Never forgot the dark days of 1940. Never forgot Churchill's voice on the radio, transforming fear into courage. Elizabeth Webb continued nursing until retirement. She had saved hundreds of lives during the war. She kept all her memories private, but one day she told a young nurse, "Remember, dear, people are stronger than you think. Even in the darkest times, the human spirit can endure." I saw it. I lived it. James Crawford rose to the rank of group captain in the RAF. He flew missions throughout the war, but always considered the Battle of Britain the most important. "We were fighting for survival," he would say. "Not just Britain's survival, but the survival of freedom itself." Churchill helped us understand that, made us believe we could win even when the odds were impossible. The 6 weeks that Germany had allotted for Britain's surrender became 6 years of war. And in the end, it was Germany that surrendered, not Britain. Churchill's speech did not change the military balance, did not create new weapons, did not summon new armies, but it changed something more important. It changed hearts. It gave people courage. It transformed a nation on the brink of defeat into a nation that would never surrender. Sometimes, words are more powerful than weapons. Sometimes, leadership matters more than military might. Sometimes, refusing to give up is its own kind of victory. Germany expected Britain to surrender in weeks. But Churchill's first speech changed everything, and the world was never the same.